Welcome to MedGym's presentation on Return to the Gym. My name is Gina Pongetti Angeletti, and I am the proud owner of MedGym LLC, as well as co-owner of Achieve Sports Medicine in Chicago, and a proud partner of Neurosport NeuroTour Physical Therapy in Chicago. All of the websites and clickable information is available within the first slide if anybody has any need to get some further information. Gym is a company that specializes in performing arts medicine treatment, especially focused on gymnastics and dance. As a 14-year gymnast, I have 20 years of experience as a physical therapist, doing diagnosis and biomechanics and everything from prehab to injury prevention, group exercise plans, analysis of our national team members and Olympic team members' choice injuries, as well as creating full plans with local healthcare communities. So we work as a team. No one can do this alone. And we have a team of amazing people: acupuncture, massage, athletic training, chiropractors, physicians, orthopedic surgeons, podiatrists, sports psychologists, nutritionists, families, communication experts, personal trainers, etc., that all put their heads together to make sure that this athlete is the best possible machine that they can be, from head to toe and everything in communication. So when dealing with COVID, I went back to one of my original presentations on the importance of all the factors to consider when returning from a long-term injury or illness, and it seemed only appropriate to be doing this now. Is vast and broad. As the owner, I am so proud of what we've created within MedGym to try to take science, which is so daunting to so many people, and really make it accessible to parents and coaches and athletes. We want to embrace the intelligence of these athletes so that they understand what they're doing and why. We want to make sure that the coaches understand why they should be actually speaking to the athletes the way that they do, and that the corrections that they give them are proper. At the same point in time, we want to make sure that there's a really good balance between the mental and physical understanding of the demands and the psychological understanding of the demands of the sport. And with regards to gymnastics-specific injuries, 20 years of working with Olympians and NCAA champions and national team members, et cetera, has just led to essentially being exposed to almost everything with regards to injuries gone wrong, injury rehabs gone right, having to do strength and conditioning programs for gyms for kids who have been out for 6 months at a time. Like I said, this presentation is based off of a previous presentation from '04, but really wanting to make sure that that time back is efficient and as planned as possible, because unplanned things are always going to happen. And with knowing how to rehab injuries, we then understand how to prehab things and how to do prevention for things in anticipation of what might happen in the future, which is what we're concerned about. So if you need any more information on anything, obviously the MedGym website is full of download information from all Congress presentations and nationals, American Physical Therapy Association, the Academy of Sports Medicine, articles that are published, et cetera. And we're here, telemedicine and in person, at Neurosport, at Achieve, to help you out throughout the country. So please reach out if you need anything. And without further ado, let's talk about getting these kids back into the gym. So, when returning to the gym, why is it important to plan? What is the point of all of the buzz of all of these Facebook groups and all of these wonderful business owners getting together to make sure that we do this properly? Well, first of all, it's never been done before. No one has ever closed down for this amount of time with nowhere else to go. We have seen national tragedies happen with hurricanes and tornadoes and everything, and the kids being transplanted or maybe taking 1 to 2 weeks off. But we have never before in history of our sport seen this much of a time takeoff. So I think that the most interesting aspect of returning is that no one's done it before. And we have to all put our heads together as to what the right way is, figure out the efficiency, get the kinks out of the hose, and make sure that the kids feel safe, that the parents are confident, that the gym owners have researched everything, that they hold their staff accountable to making sure that protocols are being followed, and that we have the kids' best interest at heart for the long run, i.e., making sure that the athletes are going to be the best that they can be 2 to 3 years from now, and that by rushing back to returning, we are not doing anybody some semblance of a disservice. So what does it mean? A gradual return. How much time? How long? How do we do it? Obviously, if you run marathons or know anything about running, the 10% per week rule is something that we have talked about a lot. I think, obviously, that is a little bit aggressive for the sport of gymnastics to put into objectively doing 10% a week, because what does that mean? Is it numbers? Is it quality? Is it ground reaction forces? Is it surfaces? Is it the amount of strength that you plan? But we definitely do have plan. We have to have a plan. And the way that we are going to do this plan is by a combination of knowledge of many, many, many medical topics and approaches, from physical to mental, nutrition, sleep, hydration, exercise phys, cycles and periodization, bone stress, orthopedic surgical recoveries, general recovery, from the perspective of everything from Normatox to cryo, et cetera, communication patterns and what happens with didactic communication with coach and athlete, as well as coach and parent, as well as parent and child, and then the didactic between simply peer-to-peer. And then we go through the stress hormone balance and much, much more. We learn how to do what we're doing with return to the gym, often from other aspects of small return, such as a kid is in a boot for 6 weeks. How do we get them back slowly? Somebody has had to take time off because of financial crisis at home, and how do we envelop them back into the team and make sure that they're a part of it? So we're going to delve into all these questions. So here's the outline for the day, so that you can kind of be on the same page with where we are on all 4 categories. So our first category is phase 1, time at home. Second is injury risk. Third is bettering yourself through it all. And the fourth is special considerations. So this slide shows the first 2. It's phase 1, time at home. We're going to talk about equipment, sport-specific strength, endurance, the aerobic aspect, mental, kinesthetic awareness, hormones and nutrition, exercise phys, ground reaction forces, and a little bit of biomechanics knowledge for you. Upon injury risk returning, we are going to talk about fatigue syndrome, bone and tendon stress, rotational injuries, rebounding injuries, flexibility analysis, some considerations for weight bearing, and how to return back slowly to weight bearing, spine injuries, air sense, and how that has to do with return, revisiting hormones and nutrition, the weight and the female athlete triad risk, as well as some skin conditions. When speaking of bettering yourself, I always like to say that when something happens, we need to turn it into something positive, right? For instance, I have used this time to really try to focus and hone in on my relationship with my children, and obviously do a bunch of these presentations, as opposed to constantly being busy flying around the country and presenting and doing assessments and evaluations on kids. So looking at the positive aspects, sometimes restructuring your life and your priorities is a blessing. So when we are looking at a kid, let's just say, that has an ankle injury and can't tumble for a while, we look at it as a blessing that we are going to be able to do bars and focus on that handstand position that we always have been wanting to. Or say the kid has the flu and they're at home, or they had a concussion and they can't be tumbling and flipping, they can still be stretching, and maybe flexibility is something. So bettering yourself through it all, part 3, we're going to talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, self-assessments. We're going to talk about flexibility, sport psychology, visualization training, communication with your coaches and fixing your weaknesses, delving into some new dance and choreography, love and understanding, and then also the importance of cross-training. And then to summarize, we'll talk a little bit about stress upon return, home situations, decision making, and competition level and structure. So, first things first, let's talk about equipment. So, what do the kids have access to at home? What have they had access to at home? Each coach should know exactly what the kids have been doing. Do they have a pull up bar? Do they have an air floor? Do they have a beam that one of the parents made for them at home? Do they have access to equipment across the board? Did everyone on the team buy a trigger point roller or a laser beam or a folding mat to do things? With your Zoom calls or whatever platform you've been using with your athletes, you should know. And if you don't know, I would suggest taking a piece of paper and sending out a survey to all the kids. Here are 5 or 6 questions that I need you to answer for me so that you're aware of what the kids have been exposed to. If the kids don't have mats at home and they've been doing handstands, which you know they have, on grass outside or concrete, wrist issues are going to be something that we need to be conscious of, right? If the kids don't have the equipment, have they purchased it? Have they attained it? Or can they still in this transition back, as there are some states that still will not be going back to the gym for at least 3 to 4 weeks, right? If this is an injury time that you're looking at this as opposed to COVID, what do the kids have at home? And if they're just injured, why can't they come to the gym and use the equipment for strengthening? What do kids have room for at home? Some kids live in apartments, some live in humongous houses. So not everybody has a 10-foot dugout basement where they can have a beam that they can flip on inside. So we have to make sure that if we're giving assignments to the kids at home, that we do so not making the kids that don't have things to do feel guilty or bad about not having them. You can always give bonus assignments if people have them, or you can do things on a one-on-one basis. What kind of parental support do the kids have for the equipment? Is there money at home to be spent on equipment, or is that going to make them feel badly because they're not having the ability to have this equipment? Are the parents saying that this is a good time for a break, or are they supporting really trying to maintain as much fitness as possible at home? Getting a little bit of a garner from the parents is not a bad idea. Taking the time to do a half-hour call with each parent on your team and talk to them about how the athlete's been doing, how they've been doing, how the family's been doing. Get just a little bit of an understanding. Did the parents lose their jobs? Are they stressed with homeschooling? Just so that everyone's understanding. Gripping is really hard at home. We have to consider and make sure that we understand that grip strength is a huge part of gymnastics, especially men's, and making sure that we are still working on grip strengthening, from stress balls to special grip strengthening devices, all the way to just simply doing handstands and flipping upside down and using your hands and your fingers to work that proprioceptive balance is really important. Remember the force that it requires in order to hold on to a bar after a Tkachev catch or after a Jaeger, where you're flipping, Jaeger into a low bar transition or something, is enormous. And injuries and accidents can happen when the athlete is not prepared enough endurance wise to be doing what they were doing. So making sure that we work on just hanging when we get back to a gym and assess if kids have that at home. Friction on the hands, of course, we're talking about rips and injuries and how to treat them and what to do about them and how to harden the skin, which is a whole different lecture. However, when we get back into the gym, understand that most kids are going to have incredibly tender hands. And if we go gangbusters at first and we have them really, really raw down their hands and they get open rips, we're going to have to take days off of doing events. The kids are going to be complaining about it. They are going to negatively view the comeback process as stressful. And we obviously don't want that to be happening either. So we just want to be very cautious of that in our planning of events when we return. Beams. So a lot of kids aren't scared of heights until you take heights away from them, and then they get back on the beam and whoa, it seems like it's 8 feet tall now instead of 4. So have they been doing any height work at home? Have they been, hopping up onto blocks at home? Do they have an actual adjustable beam? Do they just have a low beam? So making sure that we don't placate into obviously getting into a sports psych issue, but yelling at them and screaming at the kids in order to say, we used to do a back handspring, so why are you scared of it now? We have to really be tender with this, and we have to understand that equipment and availability at home has a huge something to do with their mental status when they come back. Vault, board, flipping safely. They're doing sprinting at home, they're doing blocking drills at home, but again, vault is going to be something that's really difficult to replicate at home. So that is going to be something that probably falls into a little bit of a fear factor. So we're going to have to rebuild and reintroduce kids into all kinds of drills to make sure that their flipping is fine, that their timing from the board to the horse is fine, that they're not scared to hit their head or to jam their wrists in, especially if doing Yurchenkos, and not getting their arms back fast enough. So make sure that we do a lot of drills, especially with COVID. We're going to try to do a little bit less spotting, unless, of course, it's for absolute safety purposes. But because of distancing, many coaches don't spot, and they just do hands-on tactile cueing, and often do a ton of lead-up drills instead of a lot of hands-on safety, to make sure that we ensue confidence that the kids can actually return back to the sport the way that they need. Bars, obviously no one has a high bar at home where they're doing giants and strap bar. However, they can be doing bar positioning work, they can be doing stalder work and endo work with just simple press work, definitely pirouettes. They can be doing back extension rolls and things mimicking Tkachevs. So bars is going to be something that takes a little bit to come back. If somebody does have a preschool bar or something that's sturdy enough where they are at least able to do cast handstands, it maintains that timing of the beat back, the casting part of it, and then the heel drive not to exceed the hip drive so that everybody's in the straight line. But again, just be very conscious of what your kids have been doing. And then, of course, floor, air track, spring floors. Some of these kids have these things at home. Parents have spent an enormous amount of money on home equipment, and other parents have not and cannot. So we have to make sure that we understand what the athletes have been exposed to at home from a tumbling perspective, if it's grass or concrete, or nothing, or even doing full flips on air tracks. So that's just a little bit of a touch base on equipment. So at home, sport-specific strength, many of you, as I have been contacted by hundreds of gyms for ideas for Zoom calls and meetings, etc., have done sport-specific strength at home. You have been doing everything that you would do in the gym that doesn't necessarily involve equipment, right? You're doing planks and V-ups and handstands and push-ups and squats, split lunges, sumo squat position work, ballet work, etc. But what we haven't been doing is adding velocity into it. And what I mean simply by that is that there is no way to mimic a standing back pike, although a very fast pike up does mimic it, sort of, or a squat to the ground, jump in the air, and then a pike jump. And you can kind of use same major muscle groups, the big muscle groups, but it's really difficult. And what you're missing is the velocity of motion. You're missing the understanding of the order of what the muscles have to do. Like you do a standing back tuck and you have to squat down, push through your legs, straighten your knees, extend your hips, push through your feet into a releve. Your arms need to be overhead, but right when they get overhead and they set, they have to immediately change direction, use the abs, lift the legs over, etc. And if you think about this, it's exhausting, right? So we have to think of ways at home that we can mimic all of these things so that we and our brains don't forget. However, when returning to the gym, understand that even the best of the best kids might still have to do standing back tucks off of panel mats, or their ankles might be sore and tender, if you will. And instead of making fun of the kids because of how they can't tolerate things, telling them to toughen up and harden is not necessarily the best thing right now. We don't want them to feel bullied or pressured. We want them to feel understood. This is a really difficult time for you as a coach, but for them as an athlete, they're the ones that have to use and control their bodies. So make sure we understand that. Home equipment, what is a plus and what can be lacking. So sometimes simply doing stair climbing and stair running is fantastic. Maybe you're being creative with your sport specific strengthening with jumping and alternating lunges and things that are going to make their explosive leg power better. But understand that in general, home is not sport, and we have to really take at least these first 3 to 4 weeks in just doing basic upon basic upon basic, so that when they are back in the gym, they understand landing positions. The bones get used to punch front landings on spring floor ground reaction forces, which we'll talk about later, because they haven't been doing that at home. Endurance and aerobic is our next topic. So there are two aspects of endurance in the gym that I think a lot of people get confused with. I talked to some colleges and some clubs where they want the kids to be more fit, i.e., kind of talking about them losing weight or getting back in shape, and they make them run and run and run, sometimes for an hour, 2 hours, which is great for anaerobic strengthening and for building up the kids' strength in toleration of athletics. But someone that runs an hour, right, and has a heart rate of 130, let's just say, because they're efficient enough where they're just kind of trugging along and they're not sprinting, they're not an Olympic marathoner, they're just running, is an extremely different system, endurance system in the body than the anaerobic, right? So somebody who sprints for an eighth of a mile and then walks 3/4 of a mile and then maybe sprints a quarter of a mile and then whatever, is up and down and up and down, and their heart rate may go 185 down to 72. Next time might be a full and all out where they're at 190 and they're really pounding, and then they get back down to a recovery of 100. And that is an incredibly different use of energy, right? You're using sugars and fats and carbs and everything that you have stored in your body incredibly differently. So we want to make sure that, there's always the concern that the kids feel like they're not fit. The coaches feel like the kids aren't fit. You're going to be doing more conditioning than normal. And when we're doing more conditioning than normal, unfortunately, sometimes that actually leads to further injuries like plantar fasciitis, Achilles injuries, etc., because they're doing too much of not necessarily the right thing. So from a timing perspective, simply same amount of hours? Of course not. These kids aren't doing 6 hours of work at home. They're not standing around pretending like they're on bars, kicking up to a handstand, 3 minutes, and then standing around a chalk bowl and then kicking up to a handstand again. You can't mimic it. You can try. But one of my ideas is, and I think it's worked well for the gyms that I've been working with, is simulating routines. So write out every single routine that they do, right? First of all, just write it out. Vault. I stand there. I think about things. I think, don't hit my head. I think this. We can block that negativity out. We can work with that. I think sprint really hard. I hope my steps are right. You can kind of get in there. Do the kids have negative thought process? Do they have some self-doubt? Hit the board. Reach back. Are they saying reach back, or are they reminding themselves, don't buckle their hips, get your hands fast, block immediately, tighten your abs, etc. Then what you're going to do is break down everything. So you're going to say in a routine, listen to your music. So I have 8 seconds of kind of putzing, and then I do a really hard dance skill, and then 12 seconds or 12 beats, and then I tumble. My tumbling takes me 14 seconds, but I'm actually tumbling for 6, and I break, and then I do some choreography at the end. So you can chunk out and essentially redo or mimic your floor routine by doing a really good sprint or 5 standing back tucks in a row or 5 back handsprings in a row, followed by your choreography. And you can do essentially your corner to corner work at home, but replacing it from an anaerobic and a power perspective with ideas that are safe to do at home, that that are attainable for you. And that has to come from your coach's direction, knowing what your skill level is and what your equipment is at home. How to mark and test your fitness. Simply do something that's repeatable. So get on your bike, use your Apple Watch or Fitbit, mark out a mile somewhere around your house, on sidewalks, in your backyard, back and forth, however you want to do it, on a treadmill. Then mark your heart rate. See what your heart rate is. Say today you're running at exactly a 10-minute mile or an 8-minute mile. Pick whatever pace it is. And you're going to run that mile, and your heart rate is at 165. And then in 2 weeks, you do fitness, and now it's only at 152 for the same exact pace. The other way you can see that you get fit is to run a mile as fast as you can and then try to check how you do that, or sprint and see what your heart rate is. There's many ways that you can check to make sure that your aerobic and anaerobic endurance is really sticking. So mental conditioning at home. Obviously, there's been motivation with kids really taking on being a part of making their gymnastics better and rounding themselves. And there's many kids who are disappointed, sad, and unmotivated. Forms of periodic depression, forms of depression or other mental illness through the social isolation has a lot of implications on your body. It changes your hormones, it changes your cortisol levels, your serotonin levels, vitamin, nutrient absorption. Stress changes your gut flora and your gut health. And all of this mental has to do with physical as well. There are a lot of people that are watching what other people are doing, and you're watching what they're doing at home, wishing that you had mats or a beam or that your parents could afford something. And that really wreaks havoc sometimes on these kids' mental state. We want to make sure that they're not comparing themselves to anybody else, but just to themselves. And, there's no excuse if there's been Zoom workouts and there's no equipment needed for these kids not to try their hardest. That's on them and that's their effort. But the gyms have to make sure that they don't expect these kids to come back if they barely got their back tuck, with making sure that they have it again. And why don't you still have this, when maybe they were scared to do it at home, or maybe their parents wouldn't let them. So really, really, watch what the others are doing, and be attentive to that. They're missing out on hearing your corrections. They're missing out on that constant feedback they get from you. Gymnastics is an attention-seeking sport, in that every single time that you do a skill, you look for feedback. It's not like you do a full workout, you send your video to your coach analyzes it, sends it back to you, and then you make your corrections for next time. It is instant feedback. Up to 500 times a practice, you are hearing a coach saying something that is either directed toward you or that is applicable to you, whether it's everything from being quiet to focusing to your posture to straightening your legs on kips. It's something that they're missing. So make sure as we go back that we don't overly give them feedback so that their brains are overstimulated, but that you're checking in with the kids to say, hey, are you good? Or are you ready to really start kicking it in? Straighten your legs on those switch leaps. I know. Is that them saying I know because they can't do it? They're not strong enough? Or just, I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of feedback I'm getting. So stay in tune with your kids. Staying focused on doing a sport that you aren't competing in, and seeing progress is very difficult. So there are many people that run or play tennis or do things just simply to burn calories and for the fitness aspect of it. But obviously, most people who will be listening to this lecture are not doing gymnastics just because it's fun to stay fit. They're doing it because they want to get better. They want to compete. They want to get good scores, perfect one thing, move on to the next, the building blocks, whether it's for high school or college, elite qualification, national team, Olympics, etc. So it's really hard. When Gabby retired and came back, she did, Douglas, she did a focused amount of conditioning prior to even doing skills. It was all body conditioning. Chelsea Memel has been doing a ton of body conditioning. And as she is doing the conditioning that she posts online, it is all about getting your body ready to do the skills. And when you can lean against a bar and do leg holds, and when you can do your 50 V-ups in a row and an L hold, etc., you should be able to very easily do a pack and hold your feet up into a kip. Standing back pike becomes easier because your hips are strong enough to pull yourself through. So it's the building blocks that are really important. And I think that these kids don't see that because they're doing a sport, quote unquote, at home, and they're doing all this conditioning, but they're not able to actually see and feel that what they are performing and participating in is leading to objective progress in the gym. So make sure that when you give conditioning as coaches, even when we come back, or if you're still at home, or if this is you're listening to this post-hoc for some sort of injury that the kids are doing, I always try to relate it to skills. Hey, we're going to do all this hip flexor isometrics today because it's helpful for holding your legs up on bars. It's helpful for when you block on vault, when you pull through. It's helpful for our 90-degree turns, etc. And if you take what they're doing and give them what is going to help functionally from an actual element perspective, they're much more motivated, I promise. So kinesthetic awareness and air sense, right? So we are talking about proprioception. What is kinesthesia? So your air sense. We're talking about knowing where you are in space, knowing how high you are off the ground, knowing when the ground is coming when you're doing a double, knowing where you are in relation to the beam. Are you too high or too low? Did you take off and push left or right? This is stuff that's really hard to do at home, but you can still work on it, right? You can work on jumping and landing on softer surfaces and hard surfaces. You can work on differences in rebounding surfaces, right? Single leg hopping sideways, side to side, front to back, etc. This air sense, of course, with flipping, trampoline training and getting into a belt is great because you can flip without the fear that you're going to land flat on your face, and you can make mistakes until you know where you are, until you understand what it feels like to do a double double as opposed to just a full in, when to start pulling and stop rotating, etc. Each equipment also has bounce and stability, like we talked about. So when we talk about floors and rebounding, and the bowling ball bounces off of a floor and it can bounce between 3 inches and 8 inches, and it needs to be the same. You need to make sure that your understanding of how bouncy the floor is in parallel with your safety. So if you are taking off for skills and that day you're trying to do double backs and you just know that you're not getting that bounce out of your Achilles, your body is fatigued, etc., and you know your air sense says, I just need to pull out of this, you need to just make sure that we're safe when we go back into doing skills. How do we do that? Well, at home, we can do that by flipping and twisting and rotating and making sure just kind of that we know where we are. You can do mind games with depth perception, tricks with your hand and your focus, and working on your equilibrium. But obviously there are things we can't do at home because they're not safe, like double backs, etc. So we need to make sure that we go real slow into that. And it's important that you're at a gym that has a ton of different landing surfaces, like loose foam pits and 8-inchers or resis within pits, and things that can allow you a little bit more drop space if you need to know that you need to do the skill, and then just keep trying until you're getting high enough that you're safe to actually bring it to the surface that you want. So our hormones are obviously a big deal. When we're home, we have the ability to have an increase in some hormones and a decrease in others. We have cortisol, and we have testosterone and estrogen and serotonin and all these things that fly through our system. And who knows, maybe your parents lost their job, or maybe we have an issue where school is really hard at home. And we have to really be aware that these kids are going through some big major mood swings. Dealing with being in a house with your parents for 24 hours a day is really difficult. Now, that's through COVID. If it's through an injury, you're home when you're normally not home. You're normally at a gym, or you're out running around with your friends. And that is really stressful as well. Some of these hormones are suppressed. Some of these hormones are elevated. If kids are on medications, they are elevated or suppressed as well. So body fat percentage relation to pubescent change, we'll talk about in a couple slides later, but understand that hormones are suppressed at times when you're training, and you don't get your period early, or you don't go through puberty as early when you are putting forth a lot of physical effort, and that's your body's way of fight or flight and just protecting itself, which is obviously incredibly important in understanding coaches, parents, and athletes as well. So ground reaction forces. This is one of my favorite topics, and then the next slide is one of my favorite slides to talk about. So ground reaction force, as we touched on before, is under number 1, which is equipment, is what kind of forces come back at somebody, from the spring to the carpet to friction to how tightly wound something is to how many springs there are in a board. Is the wood new? Is it bendable? I mean, there's all kinds of things. So the ground reaction forces, if you understand that, and body shaping, gymnastics is pretty easy, right? If you hit the vault and it's a pretty good piece of equipment, and you hit it at the right angle, and your body is tight enough where you're not allowing that force to be dissipated through the body, you can turn the force that you give the equipment and the forces that it in turn gives you back into whichever motion you would like it to result in, by body shaping and by changing the direction of the force, right? So the kids have to get used to it again. They have to get used to what that means to bounce off of something. Because they have to get used to it mentally. It's going to make them feel goofy and not know where they are in space. But from my perspective as a physical therapist, it really, really matters with regards to ligament responsiveness, bone stress, and hyperextension injuries, etc. I mean, Achilles injuries are bound to happen simply because of landing short on skills, not knowing where you are. We're going to talk about this later too, but hyperextension injuries, landing and blocking off vault, but not having all your muscles and the order of exertion back yet. So they're not going to be high enough, and they're going to be scared to do doubles when they used to do them easily, and they're going to want to just do singles until they're high enough. So there's lots to consider, and I just hope that everyone is on the same page with it. So moving on to the next slide. When I do my gymnastics sports medicine course, this is probably one of my most favorite things that I do with regards to anything anything with injury return and rehab. I absolutely love, and this is not all inclusive, it's just an example. I absolutely love walking through everything: loose foam pit, trampoline, flatbed, resis, springboard, air track, tumble track, regular floor, rod floor, 8-inch on resi, 8-inch over loose foam, plain loose foam, vault, blocking force, beam responsiveness. What injuries can you see coming out of each one of these things that I listed? There's my first question. Second question is, what muscle groups work in each one of these when landing on them? And then the tally question to that would be, in what order do the muscles work? So, when you're landing on a 8-inch, that's on loose foam, you are obviously, your ankle stability is higher than it would be on a hard floor because it's a soft surface and it's all, it moves. That 8-incher also slides like a surfboard a little bit on top of that loose foam. So right underneath you, instead of going straight down, sometimes there's a little bit of like that ice skate theory where you kind of go side to side. When you're vaulting and blocking, what works first? When you hit the board, when you hit the vault, what muscles are working first? Isolating your isometric abs first and your spine, making sure that your shoulders are loose enough to allow a little bit of absorption so that you can block and push, but not totally locked out so that you injure your shoulder labrum or your elbows. So play that game with yourself. Write out all these things. What would be very interesting is to do this with the kids. This is probably 1/5 of the surfaces that they come in contact with. Add to this beams and the difference between what a high bar feels like versus P bars or whatever it is. It's a really neat game, obviously, to play with the kids. So as we are talking about injury, return, and risk, one of the highest and most talked about things currently in the sport is fatigue syndrome, exertional fatigue syndrome. As many of you know, in the news, there was a national team member and Olympic hopeful who had gone through some rhabdo issues as well as some fatigue syndrome issues. And it's really a thing, and it's a very difficult thing. Profound fatigue, post-exertional malaise. You have brain fog. You can't think straight. You are super moody. You're happy. You're sad. You react an 8 out of 10 when it should have been a 2, or a 2 out of 10 when it should have been an 8. You often have a sore throat, and that has to do with your lymphatics, almost feeling like you're getting sick from strep throat or something. You have headaches. They can be from oversleeping, undersleeping, stress, overthinking, anxiety. You have muscle and joint pain that sometimes is actual pain and sometimes is not actual pain. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is simply because somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks from now, we are going to see a significant amount of kids in the country that have this exertional fatigue syndrome and don't even realize it. And their coaches don't realize it, not because they're not good coaches, but because they don't recognize that it could have been an issue, and that no one has really kind of delved into, if you will. And the reason that you need to be aware of it is every kid is going to come back at a different rate. And if you expect all the kids to do everything together, it's not going to happen. There are some kids that are just going to be so incredibly tired from conditioning because their bodies just aren't functioning. I don't know if it is nutrition, a lack of a balance of vitamins, a lack of macros, their carbs, fats, proteins, etc. How nutrition is at home. Do the parents have the ability to make them meals? Are they too busy? Do they work 2 jobs? There's so much that goes into it. And we need to just be incredibly conscious of it. This is why journaling is very important. Every single day, the kids need to mark how they felt, how conditioning felt, what body parts were easy, what body parts were challenging. Did they feel like they are stronger than they were last week, or do they feel weaker? And, given the exercise physiology aspect of things with periodization and micro and macro cycles, we need to make sure that if on Monday we're going to get them in the gym and they're going to do standing back tucks and they're going to do landing drills, a lot of leg conditioning, and this is their second week back, and then on Tuesday you want them to start tumbling, they're going to be tired and they're not going to be recovered. And if you, the definition of this overuse, which on mass extremes leads to muscle cramping and rhabdo and other nutritional things, but just fatigue syndrome on a continuum, right? On a 1 to 100. Fatigue syndrome is that in elite gymnastics, there is no way to do things perfectly from an exercise physiology perspective. It is not possible. I'm obviously not an advocate of crazy training. And overuse is a word that I use a lot purposefully and unapologetically, because everybody is different. But underusing and babying also isn't going to push the limits in order to physiologically make changes to the body, whether that's muscle development, thickness, increasing the density of fibers, changing how those fibers are reacting, making someone bouncier, or opposite, giving somebody more endurance. And you have to understand that with this breakdown that happens in the body every time the body is pushed, there is a certain amount of time. That time is based on everything from sleep to nutrition to how well trained the body is, your VO2 fitness, the perceived stress that the body has, is it more than it's used to, in order to recover. So if you work out at 7 a.m. on a Monday, you don't get to wait till 5 p.m. on Tuesday, so you have a day and a half to recover. Often elites are doing 2-a-days. Kids are not doing every other day, which I'm just throwing it out there, might not be a bad idea for the gym to do workouts on a Monday, and then on Tuesday, if the kids are in, to do more dance choreography, basic skills that don't involve making you sore, at least for the first couple weeks, so that there's no back-to-back. It's that building of the delayed onset muscle soreness. It's that building of muscle breakdown that overwhelms your kidneys, your liver, your system, and then you just stop actually making new muscle and laying down new tissue and building new bone, because your body is so caught up in just responding to the stress that's placed on it, instead of actually making up. It's going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, right? If you didn't do biceps that day, it'll take muscle from somewhere to do something else. So a combination of sleep, recovery, nutrition, from vitamins to the actual food you're chewing, the timing of your practices and everything is so incredibly important in these kids. And journaling is really, really going to make that better. The picture of the watch down there, and I don't know if you can see that, but the resting heart rate of a 78. But at some point in time in return to gym, one of the athletes that I was working with who was injured had such a high heart rate doing such simple thing like a basic bar routine that they were up in 170 to 180. And you can watch throughout a practice what spiked. When were you on floor? When were you on beam? I can mark that. When were you on bars? Ooh, you were on bars at noon. I can see that, because for a half hour, it was so incredibly hard for you. And you might not think that it was hard for you, but if your heart rate is saying that it was hard for you, that's your body saying, I am pumping harder than you think I am to do the same amount of exertion that we used to do. And what we used to do was easy, and now it's not easy for some reason. And please pay attention. Numbers don't lie, right? Okay. Thanks for that soapbox. Let's move on. This is one of my favorite quotes and pictures. Physiologically, you may be fine, but mentally fatigued athletes find the same task much more difficult. It is absolutely something that is so important in return from injury, especially if a kid is coming off of an ACL or a boot or something. They are so saddened and mentally tired by the amount of effort that they have to put into a practice where normally they could be, which they shouldn't be, but go with it, telling a story the minute before they do an elite level bar routine, or they get up on a beam doing a back handspring while they're answering a joke of somebody saying something, one of their teammates on the floor. So it's really, really difficult for them to understand all of the effort that they have to put in. But if they push through it and their aerobic and anaerobic systems get stronger, their bodies get stronger, their minds get tougher again, it will again become relatively perceived easier. Um, but it takes some time. And understand that physically, athletes that are going through depression or have alterations in their hormonal status, or even just stress and anxiety or sleeping issues, really, really do think that a task is more difficult. They might not be able to think ahead in that feed forward mechanism, like I said, with anticipating. They might not have as good of air sense and knowing how to pull out of a skill that they're in trouble with. They're at risk for accidental injuries. So just be very aware. And if the kids are getting fatigued, I know you think to yourself, oh my goodness, we lost so much time. Now we can't afford to miss a day. We can't afford to have a fun day. In the middle of it, if the kids come into the gym and you physically see their heads down and they're exhausted, take a day and just do team building activities. Take a day and walk through mental training. Give each one of these kids the first 3 months back one mental day in a month, or two if you want to, where they can just simply not come. They're not asked, they just have to say, I had a mental day, I just wasn't feeling it. And they have no homework to do. They don't get punished because of it. If kids don't want to take it, that's up to them. But I think it's just so great to be able to give them the opportunity to know that if they need to check out, that they can. And please use these amazing people that can help us from a sports psychology perspective. Obviously, Allie Arnold and Robert Andrews and so many people who can walk you through how to do cool down training and thought calming, as well as everything from mental routines. The second, injury stress and risk upon return, which obviously is near and dear to me, is bone stress. I see a lot of overuse injuries that result in bone stress. And again, by overuse, I think that there are many faults that go into that. Number one is the fault of chance. Sometimes we just don't know how many repetitions someone's going to be able to tolerate. It is up in the air as to if someone is going to be able to train for an elite season or not, if we peak too early or not, no matter what the best macro and micro cycles are made. And even if we base things as best we can on science, stress fractures happen because simply, one, accidentally, where you were at the right place at the right time gravitationally, and the forces through that joint because of a combination of rotation and inertia and the equipment that you were on were perfectly imperfect, like the vault of Amir at Rio. That happens. But in general, it usually happens because too much stress has been placed on an area and the body eventually just kind of gives out, right? The lower picture is of apophysitis, where the Achilles is so stressing out. And it's tugging up on the insertion. So that's essentially if someone were standing in first position with their heels together, that it's tugging away and it's literally cracking and pulling. And the one on the right obviously is a spine, and it's an example of a spondycategory injury where you can see that there's bone stress. Obviously, there's less bone spacing. And you can see with the changes in the opacity of the film where the bone stress is. But getting back to the coming back from an injury, we know how to come back from injuries, from stress reactions, by researching the etiology of how they happen. We know that there is no right answer. I can write a protocol out for you for returning to work from strep throat. You have to be, symptom-free X. You have to be fever-free Y. You have to have taken your antibiotics. At this point in time, you're then non-contagious, et cetera. It's not the case for bone injuries. I can't tell you if you have shin splints or tibial issues, if it's going to be 6 weeks, 12 weeks, or 18 weeks. It depends. Are your glutes strong? Are you doing your homework? Are you overworking? Are you listening? Did you take complete rest? Did you do partial rest? So it's all based on multifactorial compounded answer. And the biggest thing is that overtraining and overuse which leads to bone stress, has to do with the hardiness of the athlete, meaning, are their bones dense genetically? Do they eat well? Do they have leaky gut syndrome where they could be eating great, but they're not absorbing anything? Do you have autoimmune issues in your family, gluten, celiac, etc.? Do you have stress and anxiety, which is leading you to malabsorption? Are you taking medicines, which might be leading to malabsorption? Are your sleep patterns off, and therefore you are not getting into that restorative sleep? Are you doing too much training? Is there too much stress in your day where you're calorically deprived, and then your metabolism then slows down and everything is just all kind of backwards? So there are so many different things to consider. But the point of the slide is that one of the main concerns for coming back from anything, whether it's vacation, to taking time off to do a different sport if you're recreational, to you had a massive injury and you had surgery, is that your bone density will go down. Wolff's Law says, and this is great, you should look this up because it's super fun. Your body is inherently incredibly lazy, and it will make your bones more dense if it knows that there is stress that is happening to it that it has to respond to. The more that you push on it, the tougher it will get. Look at everything from, I know this is an odd comment, but like an abusive situation in a relationship where a little bit of yelling to someone who's not used to it might seem like a lot, but more yelling doesn't seem like it's as bad if it's relatively not as much as it usually is. It's all based on what you can tolerate. Runners who never run think 1 mile is a lot, but a marathoner says, holy cow, I could never do 50. So it's all based on that. So Wolff's Law for bones is that without stress and force and reactive force that's placed upon it, that the body won't react by making something more dense and allowing it to anticipate that force will need to be countered in the future. So if an elderly person swims and does some strength training but doesn't do a lot of weight bearing, their bone density will go down. Someone goes into space, if they don't do resistive training, their bone density goes down. So as these kids have been home, they're probably sitting more, they're probably doing more Xbox, they're talking to their friends, they're on their devices, etc. Physically in a gym, they're never sitting, especially if you're at my gym, you're not sitting, right? So you are standing. So even the amount of standing versus sitting that they're doing is different. The amount of physical tumbling and jumping that they're doing is different. So you cannot go back into the gym the first week and go from, say someone took the equivalent of 30,000 steps as a gymnast before, and then they went down to 4,000 and now we're going up to 20. Like, it's way too much. So if you want to play games and have the kids look back on their iPhones or whatever and see what their average, if they're wearing their watch during practice, right, what their average steps were and how they were beforehand, great. And build them up in hours, build them up in numbers. You might think, oh my gosh, 25 back tucks is what they should do. But first day, 5 to 6 of them, right? And even if they want to do more, be done, move on to something else, because you won't know and see, unless it's an actual acute fracture, the ramifications of this load stress for weeks. And if not, when it's already too late and now everyone else is ramping up and this kid has to sit out again, think about what that mentally will do for them, as in their motivation, as well as now we're layering in that we're not all in the same boat anymore. Like, we are now coming back. Now that athlete's going to have to take time and come back again. So just be very well aware with it. In addition to that, their nutrition has to be on point, right? Their vitamin D and calcium intake and iron intake has to be superior. They need to make sure that they're eating good foods that lead to that. They need to make sure that they're taking healthy and good absorbable supplements. Again, contact me. I would be more than happy to introduce you to nutritionists who I respect completely to talk to, and or even getting blood work done if you have had it in the past, getting your CMPs and panels done in order to just see where your baselines are and if you're lacking in everything, especially vitamin D if you've been in a colder climate and been inside, not out in the sun as much. It's just a lot to consider. So feel free to reach out on that. So as we are on step 3 of injury risk upon return, the tendon and ligament stress, obviously everybody is well aware of the amount of stress that goes through your system when you are landing a skill, right? You need to be able to land short and not have it snap your Achilles. You need to be able to crunch your ankle and not have your talus jam and fracture. You need to be able to take off on a 1.5 punch front at maybe a little bit less than 1.5 and not have something, snap. And until the muscles that are around your body are strong enough again, and until your proprioception in your body is perfect, it is going to be really, really difficult to push this envelope because you want to. Will is not going to have a way with this. This has to be physical preparation. So the ligaments are going to react. There's, a brain to your ligaments and your connective tissue where proprioception, where if you're stretched or if something's turned or if your femur and your tibia aren't aligned, and that's going to take a little while to come back. That's why basics are really important. Attachment injuries, the avulsion category, like where the Achilles pops off or your hamstring pops off the bone or your patellar tendon, Osgood's, everything else starts to increase, is really, really important. So we need to make sure that we're aware that these are things that if force is placed upon the body and the muscle is not strong enough to counter that force, be it velocity, inertia, rotation, etc., there is a give and there's a breaking point. And sometimes that's a muscle tear. Sometimes that's a strain where the muscle tries too hard and it fails, so it hyper tightens. And at other times it tries so hard that it just eventually pulls off of its attachment. The glue comes off, and that's a very long recovery process. So the old range of motion that you had to have, we need to make sure we build it back up again, so that we're not doing switch leaps and our front leg we're whipping it in, because if we try harder it'll get there and the hamstring just pops a little bit. If we're doing double backs and we know we're going to be landing short, you've got to make sure that our bent knee dorsiflexion, or like in that picture down there, the calf stretch, where you actually just kind of take the back knee and bend it to see how far the shin can move forward, is really back where we need to be. Rotation in the shoulder. I highly doubt all these kids are doing, an hour of internal and external rotation work at home. They need to make sure that range is achieved before they're doing skills. Make sure their internal rotation is back before they're doing internal and external rotation, before they're doing German giants and even front giants and pirouettes and Heelys, etc. This can and should have been worked on at home, but check and maintain. So rotational injuries, and that's just an example of So rebound blocking injuries, obviously that's a beautiful picture that John Chang took of Simone, and we're watching just our rebounding, right? We rebound off of a vault when we block. We rebound off floor with our hands when we tumble, as well as our feet. We rebound off beam when we're tumbling, especially less so rebounding if you're doing like backhand layout, step out. You're stepping into something. You're really just squatting and jumping. It's not rebounding. But 2-foot things like punch fronts or round off dismounts, etc., are all rebounding. So we really, really want to make sure these kids understand, they don't have to be physics experts, the concept of ground reaction force and why it's so important for us to do all these line hops and bounces and blocking drills and tons of round off backhand single flips and uphill drills and things, so that our bodies get used to us blocking again. Their backs are going to be sore the first time that they do vault because their paraspinals, or the long muscles up and down their spine, just haven't done that stuff at home. Even if they're doing underarm swing, handstand, blocks on floor, or if they're doing bouncing push-ups or whatever, it's just not the same from the responsiveness of actually taking hundredths of a second to make decisions with, change in velocity and change in rotation. So, one of the best things is for an elite, they often say if they get a new floor that it takes about 2 weeks for them to get used to a new gym or a new floor, et cetera. But yet we take them to nationals and worlds and Pan Ams and everything else, and they have to get used to a new floor in, 3 or 4 turns. They'll do basic tumbling just to feel, hey, is it soft? Is it squishy? Do I need to be a little more absorptive? Oh, wow, I was a little too tight and I was over rotating things. So I remember that with Simone in Rio, where the floor was so bouncy that she was actually over exerting some things. And needed to just be pulled back because of obviously energy and excitement, but also just because of the floor. So we just have to really, really make sure that we are understanding of the fact that the kids have to get used to this again. Injury risk, ankle sprains, lack of medial and lateral ankle support, right? The inside and outside muscles that prevent you from either going flat into pronation or rolling and doing a supination injury or like an ankle sprain. That injury risk is real, because when they're landing, they're thinking, oh my God, don't die, or where am I in space? And not as much having their feet think automatically for them on surfaces. So multiple surface training at home, standing on pillows, single leg stance, squatting, lunging, and doing motion sideways, forward, and backwards into squishy surfaces, couch cushions, etc. Of course, obviously being as safe as one can with it at your own risk. And knowing that working those surfaces is really important. The Achilles force reaction, too much stress and lengthening, as well as too quick of a turnaround, like someone punches really quickly into a double full or a triple, as you have to obviously do shorter punching, can literally lead to way too much force. And if the Achilles can't handle that, if the muscles can't handle that, if the body is loose, that results in something tearing. And we don't want to do that. Hyperextended knees are a big injury risk, right? Rebounding skills, nobody knows where they are anymore. A lot of people are going to be landing short. Then once their muscles come back, they're going to be too high because they're going to be using too much power instead of honing in on what they actually need. They're going to open up too soon if they're lost in space. So super important just to do numbers and numbers and numbers, repetition of things with less pounding and less force, but just to get them used to that air sense again. Hyperextended elbows with blocking, again, being too high in the air, not knowing where they are and reaching to block instead. And when they reach, they pop that elbow. And being too high or too low can also affect, obviously, the capsule, the labrum in the shoulder, because if you jam your shoulder into the socket, or likewise, if you are trying too hard and pushing without the support of your deltoids and your pecs and your serratus, your lats, your tricep, etc., you are putting that force through the socket of the shoulder instead of the muscles being able to almost isometrically contract, sling the shoulder, hold it, kind of grab and then release and concentrically contract, which is what we want. Second to last one, an injury risk upon return, is our flexibility issues. Should have been working on this at home for sure, as we know. Bottom right picture, of course, is beautiful Riley up in a leap position. Her flexibility is amazing, and she works on it on a consistent basis. And obviously, there is no person in the world, whether flexible or not flexible, that can take time off like we have with COVID if you are not at the gym. If you're a level 6 or a 10, a beginner level 3, or an elite, you have to understand that just because you want it to come back doesn't mean that it will. And you can't come off of an injury and all of a sudden swing your leg and not expect for your hamstring to really be upset. So at home, we should be working on muscle and joint flexibility, not just muscle, right? So we should be working on moving our wrists and ankles around. We should be working on making sure our hips can open and crunch and squat and go in all their directions. The athlete and coach need to expect things to come back, but not incredibly quickly. So everything from pulling adductors to pulled hamstrings to tight and sore quads, we see all the time, and we are going to be seeing it in the next, I'd say, 6 to 12 weeks in the clinic and throughout the country as we layer in all of the re-entries. If we're guarded and we're scared and the muscles are sore from the day before, say we've done a lot of deadlifts or Russian split squats or walking lunges or burpees or whatever, then the next day their muscles are going to be tight and sore. Coaches cannot just say, hey, suck it up, let's roll it out a little bit, stretch a little more. Now we're going to try to do, high kicks with TheraBands, or we're going to do switch sleeps. All of a sudden, these kids are going to pull and strain things. So coaches, we have to really make sure we understand what we did the day before to make them sore. So just like injuries, when they're coming back, you think to yourself, kid's been in a boot. What the heck? Why is their hamstring not used to this? Because they haven't been leaping and jumping. And so these are these tertiary injuries that happen that we just have to be really cautious of, right? Other methods that can help to diminish the soreness, which will make the muscle more pliable and less likely to be injured, especially the hours after, the day after practice, or 2 days after. Cryotherapy, which is the liquid nitrogen cryotherapy chamber. Normatec boots, which are compression boots. They'll go on and they'll help with flushing out your system, increasing blood flow in the muscles by gradient compression. We have them for arms, hips, and legs. Definitely heating and stretching and warming up. So heating pads, rollers, vibration rollers, vibe plates, etc., before warming up to get the most possible blood flow in, and fascial relaxation before stretching. Hydration alteration. Make sure that you are really, really, really making sure that we're drinking a lot of water to flush out our system. In addition to that, electrolytes. You can do a Gatorade, but it has sugar in it. So if you're ready for the sugar, go ahead. You can do Propels, which have the electrolytes with the hydration, but they have artificial sweeteners. You can do Endurolite tabs or electrolyte tabs that have the electrolytes, and then simply drink water, or Noon tabs, or any of these. There's tons of them. If you look up endurance sports and triathlon, there's a lot of replenishments for athletes. Running stores have them as well. But it's just really important because that will help our muscles stay as healthy as possible so that there's less likely to be injured. And then obviously, lastly, is the inflammatory diet. So being on a non-inflammatory diet or a low inflammatory diet, dairy, eggs, red meats, beans, there are sugars, right? Gluten. There are plenty of things and plenty of reasons and plenty of stories and people that will be talking about goods and bads of all of those things. But it's very important to just be a little bit more conscious of it, especially in the time that we're returning to the gym. And last in this injury risk upon return, lastly, number 7, we have the upper body injuries. So we're talking about our TFCC, or our wrist injuries that happen. We have a huge presentation on TFCC injuries, and I think everyone should watch that. It's much shorter than this, and it is really informative for wrist pain and wrist injuries. Distal bone stress, or gymnast wrists, which is the DRUJ, the distal radial ulnar joint, and where that radius and ulna meet those carpal bones, and then those meet, your metacarpal bones, your carpal bones, and everything. It's like a 2-joint system. And how, when you haven't been weight bearing as much as you usually do, even though these kids are doing handstands, they're not doing them for 7 hours, they're not doing them on a bar, they're not doing them maybe on a beam. We just have to be really careful, especially with them having the opportunity to grow, because their growth plates will be open, that stress to those growth plates is going to lead to some additional injuries. Lower body wise, we want to look at patellar tendon. Too much jumping will lead to patellar tendonitis, which is one of the most common things we get from people that are off for ankle sprain surgeries, post-boot syndrome, hip surgeries, etc. The knees just aren't used to it. Hopefully at home, kids are doing a lot of squatting and jumping and things, so that shouldn't be as much of an issue. But again, they're not rebounding on surfaces. So just be very, very careful. You can look up anatomically what the tibial tuberosity is, which is the bone that patellar tendon inserts into. And then obviously you have the patellar tendon, which goes in the space between your kneecap or your patella and your tib tube. Then you have obviously where the patellar tendon itself can be pulling and causing stress to the patella. So we just want to look at all those things. See a PT or talk to one if you need help with the etiology of injury or some diagnosis with that as well. Severs, which is essentially just the same thing except in the heel, where the Achilles inserts into the heel, like the picture that we showed earlier of that apophysitis. And that is something that if kids are prone to it, it will definitely come back to bite you in these weeks. And, that can be pushed through to an extent. But if it's pushed through too much, it's going to lead the kids to being unsafe because they're not going to be able to have the power that they have. We have to make sure their glutes and their hamstrings and their calf muscles are strong enough so that it doesn't affect things. Landing issues, if you land and you land too short, like the picture in the previous slide of the goniometer measuring the ankle, that talus or that top bone is going to have a talar dome fracture or something else in the ankle. And we just want to make sure that ankle joint mobility is there just in case they land short, which they're going to do, all of us do, and crunch their ankle. And then repetitive things that we're concerned about. The perineals and the outside of the ankle are the muscles that they do pull up and out, but mostly push down and out with regards to releve positions in gymnastics. And that can get a tendonitis or just an irritation from just coming back to the gym and doing a lot of beam complex and a lot of releve and a lot of jumping and all the soft surfaces. So just watch out for that. And plantar fascia, which is another one, no matter what your lower body injury or time off. In COVID crisis, obviously it's time off, but if it's an injury or an illness, plantar fascia always kind of reams its head because you are just not used to, the bottom of the foot is not used to that much weight bearing and that much pounding, and that leads to some issues. When we're talking about spine, we talk about arching issues, although they should be stretching at home for sure. Back bends and issues are things they can be doing if they're skilled enough and safe enough. Obviously, caveat this with whatever your coach thinks that you are good to do. Back walkovers, back handsprings, etc. If you're doing layout step outs on the grass, the body is just not used to sometimes being whipped back into an arch position, right? The tap for a Jaeger, Tkachev stuff, the pre-flight for your Chenkos, back walkovers, back handsprings, etc. So just make sure that our shoulders and our hips are staying strong. Please watch the hinge theory presentation, much shorter. It's not as much a lecture, but a demonstration. And I think that you'll really enjoy the information on that, because we don't want the intersegmentally, the spine has to be able to move like a slinky. Each individual piece has to be able to bend forward and backwards, left and right, and rotate left and right. And if any of those parts are stuck because they're stiff, or if you come back to gym and you're doing all the strengthening, but you're not working on that segmental mobility, the minute that you actually demand that the back bend and the kids can't do it, they're just going to force it. It's like an adult gymnast trying to do a back walkover and being like, oh my gosh, my hands didn't even get close to like the ground when I thought they would because my back didn't arch, but they're going to force it to be there because you know where you should be. And that's going to lead to injury. So stress and compression injuries in the spine from coming back too quickly and jumping too much is also an issue. So we want to just make sure we watch physical numbers and just pay attention to kids who have had back pain in the past, and if any are developing back pain in this process. So air sense is something that the kids can for sure be working on at home. They can be working on jumping in the air. They can do jump full turns. They can tip sideways and do gingerbreads and almost like teeter-totters or levers at home, so that they're understanding being upside down. But of course, it's all about safety. The lower the level of the kid, the less that likely they're able to do things that's safe at home. Higher level kids can't do the level of activity at home that they're doing at the gym because of safety concerns and equipment. So you just want to make sure that you're doing what you can. Rotation and flipping, spinning and twisting, lateral tilting. So you want to make sure you work all three planes. You can stand on one foot and just tip sideways on one leg like an airplane and back again. You can stand and do levers back and forth, upside down to right side up. You can go slow. You can go quickly. You can rotate side to side while standing on one foot, like holding your arms like Charlie's Angels, and understanding that your air sensor, your rotation, this is all still with your feet on the ground, right? Then you can progress this to jumping, jump full turns, jump full turn, and then jump again in the same direction. Do a jump full turn and then rotate directions. Get yourself to a point where you're like, wow, I never used to get dizzy. If you get dizzy, you got to stop because it's not safe anymore. But understanding that your body is going to have to get used to that flipping again. Back when you get back into the gym, you're going to have to know how high you are, and that's going to be an issue. So a lot of drills and confidence building to make sure that you know where you are. So if we revisit hormones again, obviously we are talking with the female body about how our hormones are going to be increasing. You might see your kids in prepubescent ages, so as young as 10 all the way up to 17, 18, 19, if the kids have been suppressed because of low body fat percentage, disordered eating, I say. So it might not be an eating disorder, but it just might be restricted eating or something that when they're home, a couple things happen. Either they restrict more because of stress and because of self-awareness, self-assessment, or pressure from coaches, which is horrible to say, hey, we're going to look at everybody and make sure that they're looking good. I mean, there is an aspect of safety to weight in gymnastics, which I've always been an advocate of, but the way that you do it and how you talk to the parents and the kids about it is important and can be life damning if it's not done in the right way. So when these kids are home, their hormones are going to be different. Most likely they're going to their bodies might actually take this opportunity as a window of growth, both in a height perspective as well as in a body fat perspective, or putting on body fat in our female places, inner thighs, glutes, back of the legs, or the kind of the glute hamstring area, your side flanks, the chest area, etc. And we just need to make sure we're incredibly sensitive. These kids have so much stress on them in life that they don't need anything else. And having a qualified professional talk to everybody about nutrition and eating right is super important. Now, one of the things that I talk about, and we'll talk about later as well, from a mental perspective, is, let them wear shorts at first. Let them be in a tank top if they want to, as long as it is not unsafe, when you're just doing conditioning. Because although you think putting them in a leotard so that they know that they feel uncomfortable might make them work hard, those kids that are going to get a rebound effect from that are going to be worsely affected at all than the positivity that will come out of it. So just make sure that we're being aware of it. The weight and triad risk, obviously, this is the second half of what I just talked about. The female athlete triad is a bone density decrease or start with osteoporosis with eating issues. Energy is low. Most of the time it's because of restricted eating or eating too much and then binging, and amenorrhea, which means you don't get your period. So, we do not develop often into females that could actually create a baby, which is the female body's purpose, if you will, in the long run of physiology and history, when there's not enough body fat. And if these kids are putting on a little bit of body fat and then their bodies are being given a window to say, hey, we now have enough body fat that we feel like we're healthy enough to sustain, whether you're 10 years old or 19 years old, it doesn't matter. It's all physiology. Then sometimes the kids will be getting their periods, which will lead to mood changes and hormones and everything else. So keeping, again, in contact, this is not something that you, of course, need to ask the athletes, but if they volunteer the information or if the parents want to tell you the information, just understanding that these kids might be going through this and that we need to be supportive of it and positive with it. Talk about skin conditions, and we will have a total separate issue on everything with safety and health at the gym. Lots of things, right? We're going to get really tender hands. It's a great picture I got from CrossFit Dana Point. I love it just because it's both hands and it shows an active rip. It shows that the skin is rolled up. It shows tender hands underneath, in that if that were to be on a bar, then that bottom level of skin that's left would rip off. And at this point in time, saying to an athlete like this, get back on the bar and do something, is just not appropriate. They're an injury risk to themselves because of the pain. It's only going to make the recovery process worse. And there are many ways to obviously recover from rips, which we can talk about in a separate lecture, but just be aware that you can't all of a sudden do bars when you haven't been doing bars in a while. You can't mimic that friction at home. And I think that that is something that is really going to be stressful for the athletes when they come back, is wanting to do more than their bodies actually will let them do. And as coaches and adults, we need to make sure that we are aware of that. In addition, remember, hand sanitizer is alcohol and is drying, and some have aloe in it and some don't, and some kids are putting lotion on and some aren't. And with the amount of hand sanitizer that we are using, is very interesting for the skin, and some kids are having reactions to it. People are washing their hands. Some soap has lotion with it. Some soap does not. So we just have to make sure that we're paying attention to skin integrity. Obviously, dry skin, rip skin, crack skin is also much more likely to pass on disease and illness. So we just have to be concerned about that with COVID as well. So, as we talk about bettering ourselves through it all and being home and what we're exposed to, we really want to make sure that we keep these kids positive. We want to go back to their roots. Why are they doing this in the first place? What made them fall in love with the sport? What do you want to get out of the sport? We've used this time through Olympic Channel and NBC and Inside Gymnastics and all the other venues to replay a bunch of really neat Olympic moments, and to maybe have these kids identify a little bit with the analysis of the sport. My daughter's soccer team is doing that, which is amazing. Having these kids sit down and actually do movement analysis and game analysis, which is something I think that's really important when we're physically so focused on working out all the time. We don't get a chance to do that unless it's a sport that's used to doing film breakdown, like football and basketball. So I think it's really interesting to talk to the kids about what they want to get out of it. When they're home, are they motivated to just keep doing what they love to do and what they're good at? Or are they also motivated at some point in time to work on the things that they're not? Can they talk to their coaches? Can they self-assess? What are your workout habits? What's good and bad? Oh, I usually stand around too much. I go to the drinking fountain too much. And I know during stretching, I talk a lot. So maybe make it a goal at home to do some flexibility and to do some chatting, if you will, with yourself, and make it not interactive, but really focus on what your body's going through when you're doing a tight pike stretch, or feeling what a breath feels like if you think about getting the oxygen in and what it's doing. Walking through strengths and weaknesses and conditioning on each event. My shoulders are strong, my kips are good, my calves are really bad, my leaps, my back leg is always bent. It's difficult to do, but because we're not overwhelmed right now with schoolwork and with going to the gym, 10 to 30 hours a week, it might be easier to do this now. Flexibility issues, same exact thing. What can we work on? What can we make better in this time that we can do at home without the need for private lessons or any help? Then share that with your coaches, ask them the same questions, or if you are a coach, take an opportunity to make your own worksheet. Send it to all the parents and the kids, ask them to fill it out, have the coaches fill out the same thing, have a Zoom call or a FaceTime or something, or a Skype, and make it so that you see if your self-assessment is in parallel and in line with the self-assessment of the coaches. Ask the coaches what they think makes you tick and what they think makes you want to love gymnastics, and see if that goes together. Lots of different ideas for this. Now, when we're talking about flexibility, we also want to make sure we're talking about all body parts, right? And what is good and what is the struggle. So if we're assessing our flexibility, we need to assess the things that we think about all the time, like hamstrings and the front leg of a leap, but also how flexible is our chest so that we can hold open our posture, or can we still touch our chin to our chest, or is our back really tight? Really important to do and walk through. PTs, we can do that for you. We can walk you through that via video. We can even walk you through that and do pictures and measurements as well. So I think that that's a good opportunity to take advantage of some of this time. Skills that can benefit from increasing your muscle flexibility. Write down and say, listen, I've always wanted to get in a noti, but I want a really big split when I hit the beam. Great. I've always wanted to do a switch side, but my center splits aren't big enough. I've always wanted to learn how to do tacachos, but my shoulders aren't flexible enough and it hurts when I started practicing taps. So walk through what you think could be better and let's get on it. Joint limitations. Do you have the ability to have shoulder internal and external rotation to do the bar skills that you want to do that are now in code of points giving all this bonus? Do you have the ability with your hips to be able to do the leaping positions that you want? Or better yet, how tight are your ribs? And can you do that amazing choreography that really makes it look like you are just moving like silk, and all these activities that you can do at home to make that better? So, sports psychology is something that I am a humongous advocate for. I did it when I was a kid, and I did it when I was an adult doing Ironman training, and I recommend it to almost every single one of my injured athletes, not because I think that they are crazy, but because it is so important for someone else to take a look at what you are going through, reassure you that things are going to be fine, give you ways to reassure yourself that there are methods and practices and exercises that you can do at home that can help with fear, that can help with avoidance, that can help with PTSD, that can help with something you saw or observed, but more importantly, can keep you motivated and doing good goal setting. Goal setting that is good are things that are not always easily attainable, but also not always so far of a reach that you are going to be constantly resetting and going through disappointment. There are the sports psychology, like I said, with Allie and Robert Andrews. I mean, it's just so amazing to walk through how to turn situations such as this into something positive and how to reset your mindset on a daily basis. The first conversation that I ever have with kids that are injured when I'm talking over the phone, especially our elite gyms that we do consultation with, and I'm not physically there except for 4 to 5 times a year, is now your job is now no longer being an elite athlete, but your job is recovering. You are not an elite athlete, and then every morning you wake up and you think, ugh, but I'm not anymore, I'm broken. You have to think to yourself, my job is to be the best recoverer that I can be. Instead of basing your success for the day on how many flip-flop layouts you landed, you're going to base your success for the week on how much higher your jump height got. Or you're going to say, did I do all of my homework every day, which is 25% of my success? Did I check off my home exercise program? It's super important to make sure you do. Telehealth is very effective with that as well. We would be happy to talk to you about that, or anybody local that we can set you up with too. But books and journaling and reading, speaking of your fears, and taking the sadness that is the stress of either an injury if you're home with an injury or isolation because of COVID, and taking that and turning it into something positive. Visualization training is incredibly important and should be done whether we are in COVID or you're injured or not. It is so, the mind is such a trainable thing that can so easily be skewed by an off ramp. And walking through a routine that looks perfect and confident and smiling and associating that with all the senses of hearing what the beam sounds like when you hit it and hearing what the mat sounds like and the crowd and the smile on your face and how you feel when you hit something square is really, really important. And walking through them all, writing them down all on paper and your skills, writing down what you think before each and after each routine, then going through each skill, slimming that down to one word cues for yourself, going through your routines with your cues as well as your warm-ups to make sure you're efficient will help you when you get back into the gym, but it will also completely change your mindset for events and what you think about them. Psychologists can walk you through how to do this better, how to make whatever way that you're doing it more efficient for you, and to look at the goals of what you want to accomplish. I say too much to myself before I vault, and I need to narrow it down to 5 things. Let's get started on that. When I'm in the middle of a bar routine, I keep thinking about all these corrections, and I need to think about only 4 things. What should I do? So just make sure we take advantage of this time to learn proper visualization. When we're home and we're trying to fix our weaknesses, right, we want to really take this time to do the things that some people think are not necessary, right? Of course, as a PT, I think prehab and rehab should be, 20% of your commitment to your sport. But unfortunately, there's not enough time in a day. So if you haven't had that time to do those ankle bands and to do your TheraBand exercises or to do millions of hours of hollow holding in perfect positions or to videotape yourself from the side at home in a handstand and try to really analyze, are you vertical? Are you in perfect position? Now is the time to do it. You have the ability with social media, or not social media, with phones and devices to be able to self-assess. You also, through, I guess, social media or through texting, have the ability to have someone take snapshots of you in handstand positions or in conditioning positions and analyze them and have your coaches walk you through how you can get that better. But making conditioning and fitness goals for yourself is as important as skill goals, if not more, because if the fitness is there and the intelligence is there, the skills will come. Now, we want to also work on coach athlete communication. So, we want to take the time. This is, of course, Svetlana and Oksana, who are amazing people. I love them both. And their communication is so amazing, and just the way that they're supported. And we want to make sure that that coach athlete relationship is really important. Asking as an athlete your coach to write down your weaknesses and analyze them is a compliment to the coach, because you are asking them for open and honest feedback. However, you're doing this with an honest commitment and dedication that if the feedback is given, it will be taken, it will be used constructively, and you'll actually try to apply it to become better. So make sure that that is on the goal path when we're actually looking at how to increase that communication and decrease your injury risk. You also want to make sure that your injury prevention goals are there. Every single person has something that's been nagging them, or they have their knees that knock in, or they have their hips that turn, or their back that's not flexible. Taking this aspect, sometimes hard to hear, and saying, you know what, Sally, your shoulders are really a big project. We can work on them, or we can just eliminate these 2 or 3 skills on bars and move to doing XYZ, which will get us points without having to put us at an injury risk. So going through the code of points, going through planning what skills we want to work on and what we're excited to do, I think is really important. Falling in love with dance and choreography. There is probably not any other time that you have the amount of time by yourself with no one watching to get online and find some people that are dancing. I mean, Betty Okino's stuff has just been amazing. I love her to death. She's one of my closest friends. And just teaching kids the ability to learn how their bodies move, where they are in space, what their arms do, what their ribs do, what their legs can do is just awesome. It's awe-inspiring to know. You're not going to look silly in front of your friends because you're doing it in the privacy of your own home. If you're doing it on a Zoom call and you want to make it so that people can see what you're doing, great. And if not, you can always block it, right? But musicality and different routines and different choreography. You never thought you were a classical person? Play around with it. Never thought that you wanted to do something really funky on floor for your next choreography? Pull some music and just try to dance at home and feel things. It's good for your body. It's good for your soul. It's cross training, if you will, and it will make you such a better presenter, whether your goal is to be a successful JO athlete or whether your goal is to get to college and really wow a crowd. Now, when we talk about getting into cross training, important, right? That we listen to all these health experts that are telling us as focused, overtrained gymnasts what to do. But there is a very good fine line with cross training, right? If we just pick up soccer and our ankles and hips aren't used to it as gymnasts, we are a risk to spraining and breaking and doing a lot of things that would be bad for the longevity of the sport. So picking little things up and learning them is amazing for muscle confusion and for learning how muscles move in different ways, like a paddle sport or swimming or anything else. But really important to know that overusing anything is bad. So all of a sudden, picking up tennis and playing it, 5 days a week is going to put some stress on your wrists and your elbows and your shoulders. So we just have to be conscious of that. Again, common sense in this area. So, as we talk about the last category of special considerations, we just want to make sure I reiterate stress is high right now. Good stress is excitement, also high. I'm excited to be home with my kids, but it's still stressful, right? Nerves, everyone's nervous about coming back. Coaches are nervous to screw it up. They're nervous that the parents are going to get mad. If one kid gets sick, they're nervous about it. Kids, you have to be very respectful of your coaches and gym owners, making sure that, if they're working hard to put all of this in behind the scenes so you can come back to the gym, that we have to understand and respect that this is really something that is stressful for them as well, not just you as an athlete. And coaches, you have to respect that your athletes are stressed because it's like if they come back and they're worried, is she going to judge how I look? Are they going to think that I wasn't doing enough at home? There's just so much what if to it. And everyone just needs to stop proving to others that they're doing things. They need to do their assignments, turn them in, and prove to themselves that they're working as hard as they can. Remember, the stress from a lack of socialization is severe. We have seen many psychiatrists and psychologists post things about isolation, of course, taken from everything from prison cells to people who have gone camping by themselves, et cetera, and changing that and adapting that, of course, to COVID isolation and social distancing. But it's really important to understand what people are going through emotionally, how excited and ecstatic to go back to the gym, yet kind of how much in a routine people get to just kind of worrying about themselves and their schedules. So just to be aware. Our second topic is the home situation, right? Again, we're going to reiterate the stress from being around your parents and your siblings all day, jobs, financial considerations. The kids carry this financial stress, the return on them. They feel like they need to succeed. They feel like they get easily frustrated, or they don't want to talk about it because maybe they don't want to be there, or maybe things are at home are so bad that they feel guilty going back to the gym. So just be really conscious of the mood swings of the kids, where they are, not delving into what family situations are, but just being aware of it, which I try to do with our patients as well, because you tell a kid that they need to do home exercises twice a day, but really their parents want them to get a second job. It's really difficult to reinforce. Or if mom or dad are out of the house and they have to take care of their siblings and they're on crutches, they're going to kind of drop those crutches to pop up and down the stairs. So just have to be conscious of the home situation, which is what I always say. So our third in special considerations is decisions to continue, retire, and path for staying. I was talking to a very good friend of mine that owns a gym in Texas, and we were talking about the path of the kids. And, this is an opportunity for some kids who wanted to quit to take a break and then realize that they miss it and they love it. It's an opportunity for some kids who thought that they didn't want to, that have realized that they don't really miss it as much as they used to. It is a opportunity for some parents to see that it's nice to have normalcy, and there might be some pressure from parents to have the kids not to go back to sport. Likewise, there is also the opposite of that, which is the parents who are doing private lessons from home 5 hours a day and every Zoom call and every conditioning thing, trying to keep these kids as worked as home as they are at the gym without giving them a breath. And it is either going to put an undue stress on the kids, which is going to rebound them and make them want to quit, or it is going to motivate them if that is their personality. So we really just have to watch. And like I said, the parents need them to go back. They want them to be gymnasts. The kids get used to having a social life, even if it's Zoom talks, etc. So we have to give these athletes the ability to take their time. However, as a gymnastics community, you want to make sure that the door is always open for them to come back, with the understanding, of course, that there are ramifications if they take a year off, but understanding that it's really hard for some of these kids to make these decisions on their own. Be supportive of the step down program. If they want to go from elite to JO to excel to classes to once a week, rec. If they want to switch between disciplines like try tumbling or cheer or trampoline, acro, circus, etc., encourage that and be proud of it, because we want to make sure we're setting examples to these other kids who might be secretly, internally holding on to wanting to not be there, that if you are supportive of these kids moving on and you can still see that they're then part of your gym family and the gymnastics community, it will give these other kids the ability to be brave and to step up to their parents sometimes and say, hey, this isn't for me anymore, but I feel like my decision is going to be okay. So, competition levels and structure. The reason that I say this, talking as a PT, is I don't want to see 100 more people in my clinic next year because these kids are pushing themselves so hard to get new skills because they've missed 3 months of training, that if it wasn't going to be in the first place, or they were a bubble kid, whether they were moving up from 7 to 8 or whatever it was, that they're pushing themselves and then having all these injuries. So address concerns of levels with the kids and how this year might be different from next, but in the course of 3 years, whether you go 7-7-8 or 7-8-8, and you're still in 9 and 4 3 years or whatever it is not going to make a difference. It's not worth losing your health in order to push yourself to have this level chasing. So we want to make goals that are fluid. We want to make goals that are domino affected. If you reach this, then we get to this, and make sure that we're just constantly reassessing our goals in this way. So, in conclusion, take your time, plan ahead, make sure we plan weeks and months and 3 months. And there's a possibility that we're going to be repeating stay-at-home orders, just like there's a possibility that the injured kids get injured again, right? And this happens all the time. So we want to make sure that we have journaling. We want to make sure that we have structure, and conditioning matters. No gyms, if possible, should be having their kids condition on their own. We really should be observing it as if it is a 5th event for women and a 7th event for men. It's very important. Enjoy this process of watching yourself if you're an athlete, or your kids if you're a parent, or your athletes if you're a coach, go back to the way that they were before, and even better. Watch them grow, watch the human body go back into having this amazing muscle memory, and above all, be safe and have fun. Contact us with anything that you need, whether it's telehealth or video chatting, or analysis of your gym's strength and conditioning program, advice on how to put something together. We are here for it all. We have connections throughout the country. So if there is someone that's closer to you that needs to come in person because of our travel restrictions, we're happy to, but we can sure do a whole heck of a lot on communication platforms. So thanks again for your support. Please follow our Facebook pages, YouTube channel, and all the information coming out. We will be doing a live Q&A regarding all these topics in about a week, so stay tuned, and thanks for listening.